right? And so take it away, my friend.
Well, I wanted to ask about when we talk about the Dhamma, I was interested in hearing about how improvisation and metaphor play into it. And also, I know I had asked you before about watching hands.
Hmm.
And I wanted to hear more about what you thought about the importance of understanding what our mind's doing and how that plays into our behavior and such.
All right. The first thing that you asked, then let's start talking about that. Um, it actually plays in with the way to teach the Dhamma. That the Dhamma and what I'm talking about now generally comes out of Sutta number 139 in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha there is talking about to use the native language of the student who's listening, rather than having him to listen to stilted language. That in fact, that's probably the biggest problem with Western Buddhism, is that we've got such bad translations, partly because beginning translators, those who are learning how to translate, want to make sure that they get it right word by word. And so they always put in the flavor that they're reading. And in that regard, the Pali language, or the collection of languages that we call the Pali, was in a different culture, in a different environment. That in fact you can see, even in your own lifetime, if you've gotten a little old, that the language of the 1950s is completely different than the kind of language that we use in the early 2000s. We're using concepts and terminology about technology and things that didn't even exist 60, 70 years ago. Never mind now 2,500 years in a completely different culture. And so learning to speak the language of the student is best done by someone who has had to go through that sort of situation that I have gone through, of trying to pick up the Pali from Thai monks. So going through several different cultures that way. That in fact, one thing that I have heard about over time was back in the 1990s, the Thai people and Thai friends says that you're half Thai. Now, what I guess that means is that most Farang, and I have actually seen Farang who have lived in Thailand for many, many years, know the language much better than I do, and still are completely Western. They haven't changed into Thai mentality at all. And so in the 1990s, me being half Thai, the last time I had this conversation with Tam, she was saying, no, now you're about 90% Thai. So it took me an additional 30, 40 years to gain that extra bit. And also with the language of the time of the Pali, we can understand that learning how to teach the Dhamma and speak the Dhamma in the native language of the user means that sometimes we have to get pretty far away from what we would consider to be the Pali suttas. And yet, if we're careful, we can glean from those suttas really what the Buddha was getting to. Now, in that sutta, as well as many, many, many other places, in fact, there's, I think it's in the sutta number 22, where the Buddha says, "Haven't I taught you through many, many analogies?" And then he lists about 30 of them. the analogy of fire, and the analogy of the brick, and the analogy of the horse, and the analogy of this, that, and the other thing. And so in that regard, what we begin to see is that we don't talk directly, generally, to a person about their problem, but rather that the teaching is done kind of in the abstract, and that we use analogies that make sure that it stays in the abstract. So we teach in the sense of metaphor. We teach in the sense of stories. Now, that's actually quite famous throughout history. The Socrates, he taught in questions and he taught in stories. Jesus was known for his parables. And yet, in psychoanalysis, for some reason, in psychotherapy, they really haven't learned that, and they want to talk directly to the person about their problem rather than helping the student remove themselves from their problem and understand the situation in concepts. And so the Dhamma is best taught with analogies. And you've known that I've used a lot of analogies. I use automobiles as analogies, and bicycles, and motorbikes, and cell phones, and all kinds of different things. Why? Because those are items and objects that we're familiar with in our culture. In the time of the Buddha, he would talk in terms of elephants and horses. But nowadays, it's better to talk about, I mean, how many of you ride a horse every day? But how many of you sit in a car watching it get hot, and then after it's turned off, you watch it cool off? So these are the ways that we want to learn to speak about the Dhamma, is to do it in stories and in analogies that the student will understand. And that there are many, many different ways to teach the Dhamma, so long as we are doing it kind of in the abstract. And in fact, that reminds me of a joke. This old man was in church one morning, and the subject was talking about the youth. And this old man stood up and says, Pastor, I really, really love the youth. I love all of the kids in my neighborhood. And then when he was getting home with his wife, he found the kids' footprints in the new cement that he had just laid. And he got really, really angry at the kids. And Mom says to him, well, you just talked about how much you love the kids. And he says, yes, I love them in the abstract, not in my concrete. Okay, so this is the way that we want to teach the Dhamma, is in the abstract, so that then later the students can see it for themselves in their own concrete. To be able to see it that way requires us first to understand it in the conceptual kind of way. Now, there are, let us say, tools and techniques that we can learn along the way. That, in fact, I'll use two concepts now. One is called guided meditation, and the other one is called hypnosis. That, in fact, the hypnosis techniques that were developed throughout the 30s and 40s is actually a method of getting the client to do two things. One is to relax, and another one is to start to trust. Okay? Now, what that also means is that you can see it in the sense of relaxing means that you take friendship, and that the trust then has to do then with the competence of the teacher. And so we want to prove ourselves to be competent at what we're talking about. as well as being trustable in the sense of friendliness so that they can relax. So those are the two main concepts of being able to teach the Dhamma, is to have the student become both relaxed and to trust so that they will listen. Now, I find that generally I get really didactic when I'm talking about it because I want to make sure that the student understands the concept of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. And what I wind up getting is they don't get relaxed and they also don't trust. Now, if you could get someone to relax and to trust, that what that actually means in the practice is that they will in fact start to practice. And if we don't have either the relaxation or the trust, then what will happen is that they then will instead start asking a lot of questions. And we want to be able to cut through students asking a lot of questions, because when they're asking one question after another, especially after you've just described how simple this practice is. For instance, never mind, just relax. Never mind, just start having happy, wholesome thoughts. And their answer to that will be, well, what about this sutta? And what about that? And they'll start to argue, and they'll start to get confused, and they want to make sure to get rid of their confusion by asking a lot of questions. And when someone is confused, that means that you're not actually trusting what you're saying. And so the right way to handle that situation is to start to teach them to start to practice right now. Never mind about all of the questions. What we want to do is to get them to start to practice having wholesome thoughts right here, right now. Because if they're not going to start having wholesome thoughts right here, right now, when we're talking about it, what's the chance of them doing it an hour later? Not high. What about tomorrow? Oh, I'll practice Dhamma tomorrow. Oh, I'll put it off till next week. And in fact, what that means is now they're going to go say, wait a minute, I don't remember exactly. And now they're starting to read a bunch of books. How many of you, in fact, have read more than 10 Dhamma books? Yeah, okay. What's the point of reading the Dhamma books? What we really need to do is to read our own mind. And that's hard to change because we have been in an education system to where we're supposed to know everything. Well, we don't really need to know everything within the teaching of the Buddha. We only know just enough. Just enough. So all of those analogies that he has often is used in Western culture to keep somebody confused. What do you mean he has 100 different analogies? List them off for me. I want to know every analogy that he had. Well, what's the point of that? If you can't understand just one analogy, if you can get down one analogy, which would be never mind, start again. Just forget about all of those questions and start to practice now. If we can get the students to start to practice right here, right now, then we can gain someplace. Now, there are two kinds of students. There are students who want to be students. Sometimes they want too much, too hard, and ask too many questions too fast. And then there are students who don't even know they're students. That's the general public. When you walk into the supermarket, they're your students. They don't know they're your students, but what you can do is you can give them the first lesson of the Dhamma, and that is a smile. That's your first point of information. Your first analogy to give someone is to give them a smile, to be happy, to be uh, open yourself, relaxed yourself, and trusting in the situation and in the environment yourself. And that will invite others also to learn to relax and to trust and maybe even to smile back, to start practicing the Dhamma right then and there. And so we start simple like that. The first analogy that we want to use is the analogy of the smile. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. And so this is the way that we want to teach, is to teach not in the sense of making sure that they know all the details of the Four Noble Truths and all the details of the Eightfold Noble Path. Then in fact, they only need 3 of the Eightfold Noble Path. And what are those 3? Is to remember to look. And when you can look and see, you can change. Well, there you are at the grocery store smiling. They look, they see you smile, and then they smile back, and there's the change. They're already in practicing the Eightfold Noble Path. So, one of the things about it being so difficult is because the mind itself is actually pretty fast. There is, in fact, as we've been talking about how many analogies that the Buddha had, having hundreds, there is one that's very interesting. He says, "Oh, monks, the mind is fast. The mind is so fast that he doesn't even have an analogy for how fast the mind is. It's that fast." Okay. And what that basically means is we're not talking about microseconds, milliseconds, nanoseconds. We're talking about how fast does it take to look, to observe. That an example of that would be that you're in a lightning storm. The lightning and the thunder is all around you. And all of a sudden, the sky just lights up immediately, followed by a clap of thunder. And I remember one time this happened, several years ago here at the house, that there was a lightning flash and it just flashed everywhere. I was sitting here on the porch and everybody else was in the house. Followed immediately, like less than a second later, with a clap of thunder that shook the house. I know that it shook the house because it shook everybody in it. Everybody in the house, including the dogs, were about a foot off of the floor when that clap of thunder happened. But me, I'm sitting here because I know it's coming. I knew it was coming because I saw the flash. So, this is actually an interesting point about surprise. How many of you ever been surprised by something? What does surprise means? It means you're not paying attention. There is no such thing as a surprise. But in fact, one of the things that happened to me that Bhikkhu Achan Po kept hammering. This is something that a good teacher, when you're around and living with that teacher, that if he really cares about you, he's going to try to trip you. He's going to try to trick you. He's going to try to get you to fall flat on your face. Achan Po would do several things like that. One of them was he'd come visit me in my kuti and stand in the yard and make no noise at all to figure out how long it took for me to figure out that he was there. And I began to gain a sense of presence so that I know when something is happening. That before Lucky died, I had a game that I would play with her, and that is that when somebody comes into the yard, I want to know it before she does. I mean, it's her job. She's a guard dog. She's got one ear cocked and she's listening and she's there and everything, and I'm going to know it before she does. This is a training that we can go through, is a training to be here now, a training to whatever comes up, know that it's there. Another thing that Achan Po would do was that he would sneak up on me, not in the sense of sneaking the way that you see cartoon characters sneaking around with tiptoes and their paws up like this, but rather he would just simply walk quietly. And he would walk up someplace that I was standing out in public or whatever. He would walk past and repeat a Pali word or an English language word. The two that I remember most famously from him was he would say ta 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 and just pass on by. Where was that from? But I began to know that, in fact, he stopped doing it when he knew that I had gotten the lesson, that when he started to approach, and I knew that he was starting to approach, he didn't need to approach anymore. The lesson had been given to wake up and be here now so that he's not going to surprise me when he sneaks up behind me. This means then that we stop with our detail focus. Here's one of the things that's very interesting about the Dhamma is that the word samadhi actually is not a real good word to translate it into concentration, because almost always what we mean by the word concentration is throw all the other stuff out and pay attention to one thing, some object or whatever like that. But we can see a very easy analogy of that's not the way to practice. And the analogy that I'm using now is the analogy of the Zen master with the Zen stick. Andrew, who does the Zen master hit with the Zen stick?
The student who's falling asleep.
The student who does not know he's there.
Okay.
What does asleep mean? It means that you're not paying attention to the fact that the Zen master is in the hall with his stick. All right. So this is a way of looking at it, is to be here now means to know when something's about. Now, there is a way actually of beginning to train oneself in this all by yourself. Now, as I said before, as a preliminary example, is the mind is fast. Oh, monks, it's so fast that we can't have an analogy that's as fast as the mind is. I'll give you an example very quickly. Does anybody here, Luke, do you know what the Saturn, the planet Saturn looks like with its rings? Do you know what the moon looks like with its dimples? All right. How long did it take the mind to go from Saturn to the moon? That's a whole lot faster than light, isn't it?
Yeah, not long at all.
Right. We can go shoom, 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 back and forth like that. And that one of the ways of being able to train ourselves is to use the things that are slower that we can, in fact, start to pay attention to. Now, this is also a quality that I want to emphasize about training, to begin to train the mind, and that I can give you various analogies. And one of them, you probably have heard of this guy named Bruce Lee. You've heard of him, right? What do you think he's most famous for? What is he most famous for? Andrew, give me an answer.
He's most famous for his kung fu.
Okay, how about you, Luke? What would you think that Bruce Lee was most famous for?
I'd say possibly movies, an actor.
What was that?
Movies, the films he did, kung fu films.
All right. Would you believe me if I said that what he was most famous for, especially in the circles around that knew him, was his speed? Because his martial arts, I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of martial artists do we have around? Tens of thousands of them. Every kid on the block goes to the karate school, right? But they don't gain that speed. Now, how do you think that Bruce Lee trained in speed? Alexander, how did Bruce Lee train in speed?
Practice?
Practice. What did he practice?
Being loose.
Hmm?
Being loose. Being fast. Punching.
Right, he called himself water. But basically, what he practiced was doing things slowly. So, the way to practice getting yourself up to the speed of the mind is to start practicing slowly, over and over and over again. I've got so many analogies. One of them is about the piano, and I went to the university and failed the piano exam, and then found a really good teacher, rather than the lady that was in town, and he had me to unlearn what I had learned wrong, and then practice it slowly, slowly, over and over and over and over again. And then I could begin to build up speed. So now that we've gotten this all set up, let's go to the word that you used in the beginning, Alex, and that is your hands. Begin, if you want to know how your mind works, begin to look at two things. One is your hands, and the other one is your speech. Listen to what you say, listen to the words that you use, and also look at the hand movements, the hand gestures. Right now, each one of you, you don't have to answer me, but I want you to start thinking about your hands. Right now, what are your hands doing? Are your hands together? Are they separated? Are they touching each other? Is one hand lower or higher than the other? Where are your hands right now? How many of you have been paying attention to your hands during this talk? Nobody. All right, so now we're going to start paying attention to where our hands are. Now, there's one thing that's very interesting about the hands, especially, is that you know where they are, you know what position that they're in, is all you have to do is think about it. The example would be everybody raise their right hand above their head and close their eyes. Okay, now wave the hand back and forth a little bit. Okay, now even though your hands are waving a little bit, you know where it is, don't you? You don't have to open your eyes and look to see where your hand is. You know where it is when I ask you to pay attention to where it is. This is called proprioceptic sensing, that you can actually tell where your hands are if you remember to pay attention to where your hands are. Now, one of the things that I see with beginning students, new students, is they will often fidget. You can see them moving around. You can see them putting their hands to their face and other things like this, and they don't even know it. Now, this analogy that I'm talking about, we do, in fact, have a reference to it in the sutta. It's actually in the Satipatthana Sutta, number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha references When you're touching, reaching, grasping, holding, releasing something, know it. Know what your hands are doing. Now, this takes practice because you've been using your hands for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years, some of us, and you haven't been paying attention to what the hands have been doing at all. Now, there are some times when there's quite a skill or an art to it. One example would be people who have a particular skill. Let us use the analogy of basket weaving. When a child learns to weave a basket, don't they weave it kind of slowly, making sure that they've gotten the, I guess, the grass or the weed that they're using to make the basket? They're paying attention to how it curves and bends and where to put the tension, etc., to turn it from just a mat into a basket, etc., like this. But if she continues to practice this art of making a basket, she can get really fast. She can put a whole basket together in a minute. She can put it together faster than you can see it being done. Why is that? Because she took it slowly, got it right, and continued to watch what she was doing. This is exactly what a good practice of anapanasati really is all about, is beginning to experience your body, to know the postures that it's in. And one of the, let us call it a goal or a result of this kind of action would be that we can relax, immediately relax the body. Why? Because we're skilled at doing that. And yet very few people ever think about practicing anapanasati or practicing meditation is actually the job of watching our hands, to look at what our hands are doing, to make sure that we know when the hand is moving left, that it's moving left, that when they come together. These are actually called mudras. How many of you heard of the word mudra? Right? This is what mudras are. There's various different positions. For instance, this one. Notice, in fact, if you can see, the thumb and the forefinger are not touching one another. Most people don't even pay attention enough, and so they'll put the finger and the thumb together. Oh, no, there's a gap between them. And yet, if you have the good feel for it, you can feel the thumb with the index finger and feel the index finger with the thumb before they touch. This is a skill to practice. Another one would be to twiddle your thumbs. Don't twiddle the thumbs mindlessly, but twiddle the thumbs mindfully in the sense of watching what you're doing. Notice where your fingers and hands are. Andrew, did you notice that you scratched your nose?
I knew you were going to ask me that, but yes.
You knew I was going to ask, huh? That's exactly right. Okay, so this is where we're going to practice. And when we say practice, that means remember to do it often. Just like Bruce Lee did not become so famous a martial artist by being as fast as he was unless he practiced it over and over and over and over again. That this is the whole point about the Dhamma is it's not getting intellectual. It's not about learning all of the various analogies that the Buddha used. It's not about getting 5 of these and 10 of those and 16 of them things and 12 of that and 36 of them things and 5 of this and 4 of that and 3 of this. And you'll notice that a lot of people do it that way. They want to learn the Dhamma by the numbers. Now, if you're a teacher, knowing how many aggregates, knowing how many poles there are on an 8-pole path, knowing that there's 4 of the Noble Truths, etc., like that, that's good to remember and to practice that. But really, what we need to practice instead is what are we doing right now? Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, in fact, was quite famous with me for using the statement, look at what you're doing. I remember, in fact, I asked him a question once which got him started on that. And the question was about practicing meditation. And he said, and I asked the question something like, if the mind wanders away, never mind, try again. Just keep trying and trying and trying and trying. And Achan Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says, no, that's not right. When he says, what you need to do when the mind wanders away is look at what you're doing. So this is actually the practice that we're developing, is the practice of looking at what you're doing. Look at what your hands are doing. Because the hands, like the eyes, are often a mirror to your mind. Look at what your hands are doing. Look at the kind of language you're using. Because the mind is itself is really, really fast, but if you start to pay attention to what you're doing, that's a little bit slower. And that'll help you to start speeding things up so that you can see what you're doing. This is actually the teaching of the Buddha, is to look at what you're doing. If you can pay attention and see what you're doing, only then do you have an opportunity to change. If you're not watching what you're doing, how can you actually make changes to it? So there is Bruce Lee making that punch and making that punch and making that punch, and he's looking at what he's doing. He's looking at the way that he twists his hands. He's looking at the kind of muscle usage that he has, and when he's making those movements. And he practices over and over and over and over again. So this is actually the way that we practice. Now, for some reason in Western meditation, I think because there was a couple of students who spent only a month or 2 in Burma, they began to think that real practice of the Dhamma is sitting on the floor, squatting, and holding still until the bell rings. Now, actually learning to hold still is a good practice, but you don't have to do it in a formal setting. You can just sit and look at the fact that your knee is wibbling. It's wobbling. How about your ankles? You've got your ankles crossed and one of them is fidgeting. Can you see that? And can you put your body to rest? That in fact, often I've got my right leg, my right knee tends to wobble. It tends to shake back and forth. And it looks like and feels like that it's just swinging widely back and forth. And I'll actually look down and take a look at it, and hardly anybody can see it because it's not moving very much. It's moving just a tiny little bit, but inside I know that it's wobbling. It's fidgeting, that it's moving. Your ankles are the same way. Begin to know what your body is doing. Only then can you do something about it. So this practice that we're talking about is not something that you do one time a day, an hour or so, and then quit. Then in fact, the way of thinking about it is that if you've been spending your whole life in mental hindrances, and then you spend an hour a day in meditation, another 23 hours in mental hindrances, you're not going to make a whole lot of progress very fast. No, if there's anything that I can point out and help the students do, is to start paying attention often, to remember, to look at what you're doing, to remember to be here now, literally. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. to watch what you're doing, to keep track of what you're doing. If you can see what you're doing, you have a choice of changing it. If you can see your lead wobbling, then you can have a choice. Am I going to stop that wobbling? If I can see that my hands are fidgeting and I'm banging on the door or, fidgeting. How about this? How many of the kids do you see are quite excellent at manipulating a pen or a pencil? And they twirl it around and twirl it around. They've gotten very good at being able to twirl the pencil, but they're not very good at being mindfully watching what they're doing. Because if they were watching what they were doing, they would set that pencil down. This is the whole point of then is that we need to learn to practice often. This is not a matter of doing it one time a day, even if they say that, oh, well, I sit for 3 hours a day. Oh, I'm a really skilled meditator. I can sit still for 3 hours a day. And guess what? The mind is just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, and they're not really paying attention to what it's doing. This is why we want to pay attention again to the breath. That's at least something that when you're sitting there and doing nothing, at least you're still breathing. Cannot you pay close attention to it? So this is the way that we actually begin to practice Anapanasati, is by using the tools and the skills that we have that are slow enough to pay attention to. So that when we get up to speed, we'll be getting up to the speed of the mind. So that when those unwholesome thoughts go ping like that, we can say, hey, I saw you. Hey, I see that unwholesome thought. Let me change that unwholesome thought to a wholesome thought. This is the way that we practice over and over and over again. That in fact, whatever mood you're in, that mood is determined by what your mind is doing. And that mood was determined by the fact that the mental thoughts that you were having were not particularly wholesome. They were just habit. And so by watching your hands and watching your behavior, watching your body, this will help you to begin to see what the mind is doing as fast as it is, so that you can start to change those unwholesome thoughts to wholesome thoughts. So that when you walk into that store, you can smile at people because you remember that you can smile, and you've got to smile because you've been practicing having a bright, happy, shiny, gladdened mind. So this is the way that we're going to practice. This is how we practice over and over and over again, is to practice being happy, practice having wholesome thoughts. So anytime you have questions about the Dhamma, the first thing that you need to do is say, aha, I see that question. Can I be happy and wholesome without getting an answer to that? Do I need that data? Or can I be okay without it? That we're not looking for a spectacular memory system here. We're only wanting to remember enough, just enough. And what is enough? To remember to have happy thoughts, to remember to have wholesome thoughts, remembering to relax. And in that sense of continuing to do that, guess what? You begin to trust yourself. You can really, really trust that you know what you're doing because of all the observation and all the watching that you have been doing. So this is how you train to become relaxed. This is how you train to trust, is because you've been observing, you've been watching, you've been changing over and over and over again. Now, one last point, and that is that Sila is almost always in not just Western, but in Asian Buddhism. We teach the precepts to the kids. We teach morality. We teach the kids to behave themselves. We couldn't have much of a society if all the kids were going wild all the time. And so we give them rules. However, where we're going with this is that those rules often then make our own practice difficult, because we start making standards and rules for ourselves. Oh, I shouldn't be letting my mind wander away. And now we're feeling bad because the mind has wandered away, rather than recognizing, oh, I see that I didn't like it that the mind wandered away. Never mind. Let me go back and start being happy again. And so with that, we can see then that ultimately the Eightfold Noble Path is that the outcome of the practice correctly then is your behavior. Your behavior becomes really noble because you've been watching your behavior. With the watching of the behavior, you're watching the mind. With watching the mind becomes noble. And now your behavior becomes noble. The example that I would use with that is that if you don't want anything, if you're happy and content and satisfied with the way things are right now, you're unlikely to go kill somebody to get it. If you're happy and content and everything is beautiful and everything is cool, you're unlikely to go steal something to get it, because you've already gotten what you want. What is it that you want? Nothing at all. You're complete, you're whole, you've been practicing, you're getting it, and now you've gotten it, there's nothing left to want, and your life becomes joyful. This is the way that we practice. The outcome then becomes nothing at all. Your behavior is beautiful because you're not committing any crime or any act of violence or any act of greed, because you've got no greed left. You've watched it away. I didn't say wash it away. I said we've watched it away. So this is the end of the story. This is why in the noble system of the teaching of the Buddha, we do not do it the way that it's taught in so many places. In so many places, it's taught Sila Samadhi Panya. Sila Samadhi Panya. Sila means your behavior. And when you control your behavior, you control your actions and your mind. And with the settling down of the mind, you grow wisdom. Here we're practicing just the opposite of that. We're practicing Panya Samadhi Sila. So by watching, wisely watching, your mind comes together. And when the mind comes together, then you don't want anything. Your behavior, your sila, your morality becomes perfect, simply because your mind is together, and you got it that way by paying close attention. Wisdom in action. So, Alex, did that fulfill your question?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Andrew, do you have any questions about this?
No, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Christopher, what do you think?
Good stuff.
What was that?
Sage word. Good stuff.
Micah, can you help me? I didn't catch what he said.
I heard him say good stuff.
Good stuff. All right. Ben, do you have anything to say? Willie Ben, do you have something to say?
No questions, Dhammarato. No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. How about you, Luke? Do you have something to say?
I've always got something to say, Dhammarato, trust me. I have a quick question, please, about meditation. So
Oh.
I've been listening to some of your videos talking about anapanasati meditation, and you talk about controlling deliberately breathing long in, deliberately breathing long out. Is that correct? When you
Good
meditate?
enough. Close enough.
Because so for years and years, I've been told you don't control the breath. You should just watch the breath.
Yes.
So
I'm sorry to say, even though some of them are senior monks, even though some of them are elderly monks, some of them are Asian monks, they haven't read the suttas to where it
yeah,
says mindfully breathing in long. Mindfully breathing in long means you pay attention to what you're doing and making sure that you're breathing in long. So when they say don't control the breath, let's look at that for just a moment. If somebody is kind of casually watching their breath, let's do it this way. Have you ever heard, I've heard lawyers talk about it this way, you don't have a dog in the fight.
yeah,
Okay. Well, if you don't have a dog in the fight of watching the breath, what's gonna happen? Your mind is just gonna wander away.
yeah,
But if you've got an intention of having the breathing being long and slow and easy, then you're going to be paying attention to your body and you're going to be able to relax. And so those ones who say don't try to control the breath, they simply are just repeating what they have heard without ever practicing correctly. Anybody who practices correctly knows that the sutta is correct, that it's mindfully watching the breathing slow and watching the breathing out slow. And that will actually help to see the body. That if you're just kind of watching the breath, but not paying any real attention to it, then you're not going to be able to pay much attention to your body either. Now, I know several, let us say, well-known monks. Some of them have written books. Some of them are quite famous, and they say that. And my answer to that is, man, where have you been all your life? I don't want to start naming names, but I got quite a few of them who will say don't control the breath, and they're not paying attention. At least Goenka would say it in the sense of when the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, start again. Start with a long, slow, deep breath. So Goenka had it right, but many of them, in fact, I would go so far as to point out that Sri Lanka seems to be the place where the monks have forgotten what's actually in the suttas. And so they'll say, oh, don't pay attention to it by not really watching the breath in the sense of controlling it. They're not really learning to control their mind. The mind wanders away very easily, very fast, because they don't have a dog in the fight. And yet that's very common.
Yeah.
Many Vipassana teachers teach it that way. And yet the Vipassana group, they're looking for a great big insight. Well, now I understand why my mama spanked me when I was 4 years old, and that's the cause of all my trouble. They're looking for a great big insight. Then, in fact, the real insights are always small, repetitive, over and over, repetitive, repeat, let it grind itself in. It's kind of the difference then between using an axe to chop wood versus using sandpaper to rub a piece of wood to get it to be smooth. Okay? So maybe they've got some kind of starting point about, well, you got to start with an axe. You can't start with sandpaper. But the real practice is not by using an axe on a piece of wood, or maybe making a great big chisel with a mallet, cutting and chopping and whatnot like that. Oh no, the way to polish things off is with repetitive rubbing and rubbing and rubbing. Then in fact we start coarse, and then we'll change from, let us say, 300 grains per inch down to 600, now down to 1,000, and then down to just felt. All right, so this is the way that we start, is that, yeah, you can do it. In fact, you could say it this way, is that by watching your hands and by watching your breathing, that's kind of gross. But if you're not able to actually control the breathing, then you're not ever going to learn to control the mind. But that's really okay with most Vipassana teachers, because they really don't want you to get anywhere other than learning 100 different analogies. Because you think that because you've learned 100 different analogies and you've learned all the 4s and the 2s and the 6s and the 12s and the 16s, that you're making progress in the Dhamma, to where in fact that's making progress in knowledge. And what we're really wanting to do is to polish the mind. So I give very, very little credit to those who say, oh, just watch the breath, don't control it.
Yeah. Yeah, because the controlling thing makes sense to me. Like, and I've always felt better when I've done that. You can get breathing in slowly and out slowly. You can get very, you really calm, get the mind very, very calm. So I always thought it was strange that it wasn't kind of the practice that I'd been told.
Thank you for that question. That's a very common kind of question that people will ask. They're lucky if they ask the question to the right person. Because there's a lot of distinctions in the Dhamma, and that's one of them. Vipassana being a great big insight versus repetitive little insights over and over and over and over and over again. That's how Bruce Lee learned how to be fast, was by repetition, over and over and over again. He didn't punch a piece of wood really hard one time and make that him into a martial artist.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, I just said thank you.
All right. So does anybody else? Ivan, do you have any last questions? Anuroda. Nope. All right. Does anybody else have any last moments? Ivan says his mic is stuck. All right. Well, let's go ahead and finish this talk now. Thank you all for coming. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Mikey, do you have any final words? Take it home.
Yes, recently we've boosted the speed on the website. All the pages are loading much faster now. So give it another spin. Go to opensanghafoundation.org. Check out all the different pages and let us know if you see anything that's not working properly.
Yes, it's good. We've gotten it fast. We've gotten it speeded up quite a bit by rearranging some of the software and how it is loaded and whatnot like that. But one thing that I really want to point out, and that is Mikey has done an excellent job of making it a very, very beautiful website. It's like a Mona Lisa. I got to tell you, though, it's a little bit girlish, but Buddhism is kind of girlish in that way, too. Okay, so it's got a lot of pastels and a lot of colors. We've got hundreds and hundreds of Buddhas that pop up randomly. We got random backgrounds, all kinds of stuff in there. And so what we're beginning to do is and here's the new word for you. This is a website that is Facebook for the Buddhas. This is Facebook for the Buddhas, guys. So you Buddhas, you get on this and make friends. We've got friends, we've got followers, we've got groups, we've got forums, we've got comments, we've got polls, we've got survey. If you've got it on the website, we can do it. So this is the website now for the Buddhas. It's fast. We've got a good business license now with Hostinger, and it's up to speed, and it's got so many features to it. The library page, in fact, you'd think that there's one library, but it's got a pull down, and that pull down is for many, many different kinds of libraries. And so think of it as a major, major library that's got a huge number of different rooms, and every room is on a pull down. And so there's all kinds of stuff. We've also got quite an interesting page called the Bhikkhuni page that's got maybe 100 nuns and their facilities. We've got dozens of articles about women. We've even got a map. And so we've got a lot of stuff in this website, much of it thanks to Mikey.
Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and give us a comment. I've been seeing more people comment recently, even just leaving a heart or something like that to let us know you're watching.
Yes, add some comments, put some likes in.
All right,
So-
yeah, go ahead and have a good one, folks. Take care. Thank you for being here today, and thank you, Dhammarato, for the splendid Sangha call.
Yes, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Watch those hands.
Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great night. Morning.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Bye.